I've talked a lot about cross-browser compatibility. I've talked about how to set up your environment. We've talked about some basic coding techniques, but really want to sort of stop and delve into it a little bit longer. We've talked about one of the things that really is important to me to make sure you know is that every browser is different. Every technique is different. And we want to make sure that the more they work together, the better your pages will look. If you do great CSS should be amazing in every browser you look at it. That really is our goal. The more we can do to make your work as beautiful, as amazing, and for everyone to see all the hard work you put into it, literally is our end goal here. So there's two things we're going to talk about. The first one is beginning to look at how CSS3 looks across multiple browsers. Instead of testing and going back and forth, one of the first things we can do as you're sort of thinking about compatibility is there's a lot of wonderful, amazing resources online. I always talk about using what you have, using the resources that you want. If you just type in CSS3 browser compatibility, you're going to get some really amazing resources. One of the first resources is from a site called W3 Schools. And one of the things that they show is CSS3 browser compatibility in a really, really simple table. And one of the things that this is going to show us is how things and what techniques are working in actual different browsers. You notice there's still a lot of holes. There's a lot of places where things work in Mozilla, things don't work at all in any browser. And this is where we're actually beginning to sort of look at what techniques work and what techniques don't. A lot of the techniques we worked at are going to work across multiple browsers, even on the Mac, even on the PC. As you go through, and again, this is the starting point for you to dip your toe into CSS, you're going to see other amazing techniques. But one of the things that you have to realize is not all of them work on every browser. So one of the things you need to look at is even things look like there's an amazing technique called text decoration. I'm looking at it right here, works in Mozilla, doesn't work in anything else. There's also abilities to text-align text. There's also a lot of amazing other things that are out there, but some of them work and some of them don't work. One of the examples we talked about was gradients. Really, really powerful, but then you see it when you look at IE9 or maybe IE10, where you have to do a hack. Not a big fan of hacks, because when you work on a hack, it's going to affect either performance, it's going to affect your code. It really is an extra step. The goal of CSS and good CSS is being able to make it editable, optimized for great performance, optimized for great scalabilities. That means you can edit and use it over and over again. So we want to make sure that that's always in the forefront of our minds, especially as we're going to production. If we've done our job right, we know exactly what browsers we're going to be working on, so you can actually even look at this list and you don't have to sort of think about, am I on 4, am I on 16? You should have that in your functional spec. You should also look at it in that sort of non-functional spec, look at what browsers you're going to work on. If you don't care about Opera, throw that out. If you only care about the big couple of browsers, i.e. Mozilla Firefox, think about it. If there's an edge case where someone says, I want you to use Netscape, no one probably ever asks you to use Netscape, but someone will actually, you never know. It really is what your project entails. So there's a couple of techniques that we want to use for testing. One, there's a couple of things available. One is called the css3test.com. You can run it on your browser and you can see the compatibility of your browser itself. I'm on Firefox. It gave me 54%. I did it on Chrome. It gave me 60%. And then it gave me 61% for Safari. If I were to do this, I would actually check it on IE and all my other browsers. And one of the things is I can look at and actually take a look at some of the things that work and don't work. In this case, here's another one. There's a technique called linear gradients and radial gradients that don't seem to work correctly. So guess what? I might not use those. There's other gradient techniques like the one we worked on, which would actually work. So there's a couple of other techniques that we're going to look at here. Some, of course, the red ones are absolutely broken, don't use. The yellow ones are like, well, there's a little bit of compatibility. You should think about it. So we want to be careful with that. Or in this case, Firefox doesn't like background repeat. Ouch. So again, really the end goal is to take a look at some of these sites, test before you actually release to production. Again, a production environment doesn't mean you test with your users. Try to do the test in a QA environment, try to do it in a staging environment, run tests like these on all the browsers you can get a hold of, and also begin to look at other interesting sites. Here's one called caniuse.com. This one actually says, hey, I want to click on, let's say, background blend mode, and then it begins to show me all the browsers that it works on and doesn't work on. In this case, the Android browser doesn't work on, Chrome doesn't work on. So you notice that actually is begin to actually, from a global level, tell me about a lot of the things. HTML5 has a pile of different techniques. Here's, let's say, text shadow. That's a perfect one that is actually going to work everywhere. So please feel free to use text shadow on the Android browser, the Chrome browser, Safari, Chrome, Firefox. Be careful with IE8 and IE9. Let's even take a look at gradients or border radius. Here's that famous one we liked using. Of course, that's more commonplace, but on IE8 it's not supported, and on Opera Mini for their mobile devices, it's not going to get supported. So this is one of the things that you'd want to do before you launch into production, is go through some of these sites, double check just in case. If you're actually using old-fashioned good CSS, you really only want to run this check on CSS3 new techniques, things like text shadow, things like rounded corners. And also remember, if you've done good coding and you've used some of these examples and you've actually taken, make some idea to look at things like Mozilla and WebKit and IE and actually using the code that works for it, you should have covered all your bases. So you're always want to be testing, always want to make sure that your actual CSS is going to work. So it's a little bit right before, once you have your page ready and you know which techniques you're going to use, that's what actually you're going to release to production. So hopefully you've done some good work. Here's some good resources for you to use. And again, code. Always you look at good examples. If we're using things like box shadow, add in these codes. If we're using things like border radius, it may be annoying to add all of these multiple lines, but these lines will give you compatibility.